What's up, everybody? This is Anthony with Trigger Warning Conjugate. This is part one of the second set of questions we did on our Instagram. I hope this is helpful. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to answer them. All right, so let's get into this. Big_Ginger_Viking says, I'd love to hear more about single ply and multiply gear, like how it should fit and the differences between lifting in gear and raw. So you can make a 10 video series, each video being 10 hours long, about the difference between raw and gear. So they're very different. I've had it, probably the best way I've heard it described is the difference between a pole vaulter and a high jumper. Just different sports. And they both take a different type of mastery to be great at. As far as the difference between multiply and single ply gear, single ply gear is going to be a little stretchier. Generally, you can wear it a little tighter. You don't have to change your form quite as much coming from raw into single ply. However, generally, if you're going from raw to multiply, it's a pretty big transition form-wise. So if you plan on getting into multiply, I would suggest just getting into multiply. Some people say it's easier to kind of transition into single ply than into multiply. As far as the pressure, the weight of the gear, breathing and whatnot, that might be true, but long run, you're better off just going where you're going to go and learning the skills it takes to use that particular type of equipment. Okay, next question. Zach.T1800 says, why you so sexy? #stay sexy. Thank you, Zach. But for the actual question, how do you go about programming accessories after main movements? And how do you find out what part of the body is weak during, say, a safety squat bar when you get folded? Is it weak abdominal muscles or low to mid back, or is it a mixture of the two? Kind of know the answer, but this is for anyone interested in conjugate. This was one of the struggles I had at the beginning. So without seeing the particular movement, it's hard to say where someone will be weak if they get folded over in a safety squat bar. Different bars do different things. So if you have a safety squat bar, it's going to load you forward a little bit more. It's going to make you want to round. If you have a cambered bar, it's going to expose weak hips. Same thing with a bow bar, is going to expose some weak hip areas if you're bad there. So the different bars and the different movements show different things. There could be a whole video on that. As far as identifying weaknesses from certain movement patterns, I can do a whole video about that. Now, once you figure those out, figuring out what accessories to do, that's pretty simple. If you figure out that your triceps are weak, the first thing you do after you're benching is triceps. If you figure out that your low back is weak, the first thing you do after you're done deadlifting or you're done squatting is low back. The thing that you are weak at is the type of stuff that you would do on your extra workouts as well. As far as the particular movements, that's sort of trial and error. You have to find what works for you. What works right now might not work, 5 years from now for you, because everybody's changing. Everything's always changing as far as your body composition, your strength levels, and whatnot. So once you find one that you have carryover from, you use that until it doesn't work anymore, and then you switch it, and then you can always rotate back to that particular exercise. I know that sounds vague, and I'm not trying to hold any information back, but I don't want to give out information and say this is the way it is when it's sort of a case-by-case basis, especially with accessory movements. Generally, though, 90% of people can just get a conjugate template and basically beat it into the ground, and they're going to get stronger, especially if they're not used to running conjugate. Just the added volume and the specific accessory movements where you're hitting smaller muscle groups with a lot of volume is going to bring your lifts up, regardless of where your particular weaknesses are. Monster asks, how often as a raw guy should I be getting in briefs? I have a pair and I really only use them when I'm in that gray area of pain. So as far as raw goes and people getting into briefs, I think it's great to use them. I think you can save your hips quite a bit. People a lot smarter than me have said that every athlete should be wearing briefs to protect themselves when they're training. And I completely agree with that. As far as being a raw lifter and using equipment, if you're using a conjugate method for training, you can use them whenever you'd like. You can use them as a variation. A brief only free squat, briefs to a box, whatnot. What we've had success with is taking a raw lifter and their third week of speed work, upping their percentage a little bit, and having them use briefs for their third week. What that does is it allows them to handle a little bit heavier of a load. The box squat form is going to stay the same whether you're raw or in equipment, so it's not changing any movement patterns. And it's just once every 3 weeks. It's not a big deal. And then usually I have them back off on their speed pulls on that particular week so they're not destroyed for the coming week. Now, as far as max effort movement, once a month, twice a month. If you're a proficient squatter, you could use them pretty regularly. However, if you're not doing the extra hip work to make up for the fact that those briefs are helping you out of the bottom, your raw squat will suffer, especially if you're a wide raw squatter. The other thing is, if you're not proficient in squatting, when you take the briefs off and you scoot your feet in a little bit, you're going to have to almost relearn how to squat if you're not doing it regularly. So that's something that you need to focus on. I would say generally, though, once every 3 weeks for speed work, once every month for max effort work would be an appropriate amount of time to be in briefs if you're a raw lifter. Now, if you're in pain a lot, you might want to wear them all the time. Maybe get a loose pair, maybe get a pair of power pants just for that compression, but then make sure you're doing your extra hip work to make sure that you're staying strong out of the bottom. It'd be like only using a slingshot all the time for your benching and being a raw bencher. You're going to lose a lot of your strength off of the bottom because a slingshot's going to help you if you're wearing it all the time. Holy shit, it's Tom asks, is there a good brand and or specific model that a beginner geared lifter should be considering for a bench shirt and squat suit? The best brand or specific model for a beginner would be free, borrowed, or cheap. If you want to get into equipment, the geared lifting community is very good about letting people borrow stuff, cheap stuff, hand-me-downs. Most of us hoard gear, and then if somebody needs something, we'll let them try it or use it or whatever. Lots of guys will give gear to people if they're trying to get into it because we want to grow the community. So we see somebody who wants to get into equipment, we're like, come with me, I'll give you some free shit. I think that generally for newer people, looser gear would be the best, just not to scare anybody off and, kind of lets them put their toe in the water without, putting on a fully tight suit and a tight shirt and having to figure out all the little idiosyncrasies. Might be a little overwhelming for someone who's just getting into equipment. So looser stuff and stuff that you might be able to borrow or get for cheap. Victor_Vec asks, after how long time do you come back to do the same max effort exercise? I mean, how many weeks do you take between the same exercises? So as far as max effort's concerned, you can rotate 20 max effort variations if you want. You're going to find certain ones don't have any carryover to what you're doing. Personally, an Anderson squat for me at this point is more dangerous for me, given my history of the small injuries that I've had. The risk versus reward, it's not worth for me, so I don't do that. There's certain movements that I won't do because the risk versus reward, it's not worth it. When you get into having 70, 80 variations of your bench, it gets a little overwhelming. So I mean, you could circle back every 10 weeks, I'd say, or 12 weeks if you wanted to. If you wanted to have more variations than that, you can. The good thing about having lots of variations is if you feel beat down, you can find a variation that you have an easy PR with that's from 6 months ago, get your 5-pound PR, feel good about your time in the gym and move on. You just have a lot of options. If you're traveling or whatever, you have a big list of variations that you can use if you don't have the stuff that you're used to in your normal gym. So it's kind of personal preference, but I'd say, every 10 weeks you could come back to the same one, or longer than that, or, every 5-6 weeks, depending on how hard you're pushing those maxes when you take those max efforts, if you leave any pounds in the tank. All right, so that's all we got. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. If you have any other questions, like I said before, please reach out. We'd love to answer them.